Welcome, and thank you very much for yet another chance to be in an absolutely wonderful institution. I was here a long while ago. Great to be back. The proposition for this evening's talk or discourse is that you cannot succeed as a modern nation without the nation being based upon a modern idea. You can survive. I mean, there are any number of instances of survival, but you can't succeed. Now, this begs two obvious questions. What is modernity and what is a nation? The focus for this evening is we shall take the attempts, because we want to keep it obviously relevant to our experience, the focus of the nation in the post-colonial stage. The colonization of Europe, the colonization of the world by Europe, really took off with the conquest of India. And the decolonization of the world also began with the collapse of the British Raj in Europe. Now, the last two great empires of the Muslims, and I deliberately don't call them Islamic empires because was certainly what they were not. They were the Mughal Empire and they were the Ottoman Empire. And they just happened to be Muslims. The last two Muslim empires were the principal objects of European colonization. One was the Mughal Empire, stretching from the Indus and beyond, the Khyber, right up to the edge of Burma and actually beyond. There was a Mughal army which actually fought in Burma. Didn't succeed. Otherwise, the realm of the Mughals would have gone beyond that. But certainly the British Raj had its boundaries in Burma. And the second was the Ottoman Empire. And therefore, there are two starting points to the story of the creation of the modern nation states. One is 1857, when India launched its first attempt to remove foreign rule. And the second is almost exactly 100 years ago in 1914, the First World War. The story of 1857 takes a tremendous leap forward in 1947. The importance of 1947 is something that I will come back to a little later. But in the Ottoman empires, and particularly in the Arab portions, which are right there in your headlines today, if you stand in Delhi and look to the right, you find a startling phenomenon that from our west, from Pakistan right up to the Atlantic shores of Africa, there are hardly 3 or 4 nations with governments, and I might be being generous, hardly 3 or 4 nations whose governments are in total control of their geography. Now what happens when governments are not in control of geography? It isn't as if nobody is in control. Somebody is in control, and who is in control? Militias, sometimes militias in the name of tribe, but these days, most often militias in the name of religion, and particularly the Islamist militias, which to sum up, are defined by one bit of conviction and one in practice what they do. The conviction which sustains them is what I describe as faith supremacy. That in the world, which is obviously multicultural, multi-ethnic, multipolar, there is one faith which is supreme, but superior, but that this faith is not only superior in its belief system, but also superior enough to eliminate everyone else. And this is what you're seeing in Iraq, for example. The second thing is that they have a vested interest in destabilizing the existing world, because it is only in chaos that they can find roots. Now, those of you think that the Islamic State of Iraq is small and insignificant or geographically, never forget that the territory it controls just now is larger than Britain. And the number of people who are living there is over about 7 million. It's not a small outpost. What is modernity? The modern nation state, in my view, is defined by 4 fundamental facts. These are the pillars. Number 1, democracy. Without democracy, you cannot call yourself modern. Number 2, secularism, or actually a better term than secularism, a term that resonates with our own experience, which is faith equality. That irrespective of which belief system you follow, every citizen and every faith is not only equal before the law. You know, equality before the law is easier than equality in practice and equality in society. Because the law is theory and how we live is reality. And in India, the basis of the Indian system of living is the equality of every faith before the law, before the society, and therefore I'm proud as an Indian to say that we live in the only country in the world, where you can get up in the morning and hear the azan, followed closely by the temple bells, followed by the recital of the Guru Granth Sahib, and followed on Sunday by the church bells. There is no other country. We have what I call audible secularism. Many nations permit the exercise of all faiths, but nobody permits audible secularism. You can't hear it in Washington. By these 2 criteria of freedom of the individual and freedom of faith, China may be a successful country, but it is not a modern country. And over the next 20 years, I actually see that the real challenge to the Chinese experiment of communism will come from these 2 factors. How much freedom can they allow the individual, and can they accommodate religion into their societies or not? And very often I suggest that in the confrontation between Beijing and Hong Kong, it is not necessary that Beijing will prevail. It is quite likely that Hong Kong might prevail. The third element of modernity, gender equality. You cannot be a modern nation without gender equality. It's not possible. The days of gender subjugation are absolutely over. This is a process might take some while. You may hiccup your way through towards your objective, anything, but you cannot now be a modern nation if you are regressive and if you drive women into the shadows of a veil, if you drive women outside the economy, if you drive women outside social equality. And the fourth is economic equity. You cannot be a modern nation as long as you are cursed with the kind of extreme poverty that we continue to have in India. It's unacceptable. And therefore, after 70 years, on 3 counts, I think we do very well. But the great challenge for the next 20 years for India, in its quest to become a modern nation, will be the elimination of poverty. But this much can be said, that in August 1947, 15th August 1947, 14th August 1947, both ideas, one, the idea of a modern nation, and the idea of what I call the romance of regression, of faith supremacy, both ideas got a geography. One was India and the other was Pakistan. When you think of the Iraq space, IS as an Islamic state, as the first Islamic state, you're wrong. The first Islamic state in the modern era was Pakistan. And the second Islamic state was Taliban Afghanistan. Not pre-Taliban Afghanistan and not post-Taliban Afghanistan. And this is the third Islamic state. Quickly, in the roadmap of what really is the nature of conflict. The conflict in this between the post-colonial world is the conflict between the ideas of modernity and the ideas of regression, as represented somewhere might be by the concept of a system that looks far more romantic in memory than it ever did in reality, like the Khilafat. In the last 100 years in that world, We have had another very interesting historical experience. We are going through the Fourth World War of the last century. The First World War began in 1914, ended in 1918. The beginnings and the seeds of the modern nation state were laid in the principles outlined by Woodrow Wilson, who never followed up on the principles he himself suggested, because America compromised too easily with the colonial powers, principally Britain and France. And then America discovered the comfort zone of neocolonization. What is neocolonization? Neocolonization is the grant of freedom on condition you don't exercise it. So having gone through it, and this is what led to 100 years of collapse in this region. But quickly, on another parallel track, the First World War was followed by the Second World War. Now, the causation and the links between First and Second World War are conventional history. We won't go into that. But what is important and interesting is that the principal victors of the Second World War became the principal adversaries of the Third World War, which was the Cold War. Where did the Second World War end? At Yalta. Where did the Third World War begin? At Yalta, because they could not agree on the future of Europe. They could not agree on the booty for victory. Where did the Cold War end? Afghanistan. And where did the Fourth War, which is the war against terrorism, begin? In Afghanistan. And who are the principal antagonists of the Fourth World War? The two great allies of the Third World, of the Cold War, which is the West and the Islamic Jihad. So the fact that you have collaborated in one war doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to remain collaborators in the next challenge that history will throw up. But what exactly, and there is so much confusion because the Fourth World War is the first great war, international war. After all, the region from Brahmaputra right up to the Atlantic is not a small region. And anywhere, now this war is being fought in Birmingham and it's fought in Paris and fought everywhere. And what people are not coming to grips with it. Why? Because this is the first war which is being fought outside uniforms. The war is taking place between nation states who do not know how to address asymmetrical warfare and an antagonist which works through shadow armies and shadow militias, but works to a cause, very definitely so. In the context and in the experiment that societies and nations, or the experience of societies and nations, which we are going through, we are at this moment, India is basically the Britain of this Fourth World War. One, because we have fought terrorism long before the West recognized it existed. We have fought the creation of religious nationalism long before other nations recognized how dangerous it could be. Never ever forget that through the 50s and 60s, Islam was considered, or religion, why blame Islam for the sins of Muslims? Religion was considered a much firmer basis for nationalism than democracy and then the values of modernity. And this was in the academic zones of the West. So it was Pakistan which was expected to succeed and India which was expected to end in chaos. But the survival of India is the proof, and the success of India is the proof of the idea of modernity. Yeah. It doesn't mean that we are not faced with internal challenges. Obviously there are internal challenges. There continues to be. There will continue to be internal challenges. But I submit to you that on these two aspects, on freedom, no Indian now is ready to accept any negotiations with the right to freedom. You know, there is no possibility of another emergency. The debate over religion, I tell you, is being sorted out in the final phase. It is now accepted that not just Indians, particularly the youth, of India will not accept a polity which is based on any kind of religious supremacy, anyone's religion, it doesn't matter whose. And I tell you what is the reason for the success of the Indian belief in faith equality. The reason is very simple. India is not secular because Gandhi was secular. Gandhi was secular because India is secular. India has taken and absorbed from its own history of philosophy and turned it into a modern pillar. You want a description? I don't have to go to Voltaire for a description of secularism. I'm uncomfortable with the word, frankly, because it's a European word. In India, we don't believe in separation of church and state. What we do believe is in the equality of all faiths before the law. The best definition of the practice of faith equality was given by the two masters, Swami Vivekananda and Mahatma Gandhi. And when Swami Vivekananda said over and over again, I'll give you just one, there are any number of examples, very simple one. He said, you want to know how to make India strong? If you are born in a Hindu family, be a good Hindu. If you are born in a Muslim family, be a good Muslim. Born in a Christian family, be a good Christian. Born in a Sikh family, be a good Sikh. If you are a good Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Isai, you will be a good Indian, and if you are a good Indian, India will be strong. And I tell you, Gandhiji, as always, had the perfect solution to many of these narratives that are disturbing the world, particularly the narratives of accusation and narratives of taunt and cartooning. He said something so profoundly beautiful, and that was, when you read the Gita, read it with the eye of the Hindu. Read it with the eye of the Hindu. When you read the Quran, read it with the eye of the Muslim. When you read the Bible, read it with the eye of the Christian. When you read the Guru Granth Sahib, read it with the eye of the Sikh. Because if I read it with hostile eyes, I will find enough to laugh at. But if I read it with the sympathetic eye, I will find enough to worship. And that is the basis. That is the basis of India's strength, and that is what India shows to the world. But before I end, I must end on the great challenge before us, before our generation. Oh well, your generation, thank God, not mine. But I'm pleased to report that the challenge is being addressed, the challenge to eliminate poverty. And I truly don't want to be partisan, but I tell you honestly that one of the great moments which I shall never forget is when I saw the present Prime Minister. I was not in Parliament, he had come to Parliament for the first time, and his opening remarks said something so important. He said, this government is, words to this effect. So we are not interested in poverty alleviation anymore. And you could hear the gasp, the silent gasp. What do you mean? You're not interested in poverty alleviation? And then he says, the era of poverty alleviation is over, the era of poverty elimination has begun. And that is the key. There is no curse, there is no indignity greater than poverty. And if after 70 years we have not eliminated, then something is wrong with us. The poor are not poor because they are wrong. The poor are not poor because they have done anything wrong. It is because we have not created, we have not shown the kind of empathy and concern that we should for them. That is because the people who run this country are not poor themselves. And you have to suffer a little to understand that pain. You have to suffer a little and watch your own mother not being able to go to a bathroom whole day because there is no covered toilet at home, and then wait for sunset to understand, as the Prime Minister sort of went, offline by the terms of middle class discourse and described what it feels like for a woman to have toxic vapors in her body and how much health, what a health problem that becomes. This really is the challenge. And very quickly, since I am here in this particular audience, poverty will not be eliminated. Poverty will not be eliminated by patronage. Yes, as long as there is such deep hunger, we have to provide food. We have to provide food at basically minimal cost. That is a basic duty. How can you allow a child to starve? But that is not the solution. The solution lies in only one thing, not in only in free food. It lies in the paying job, in giving everyone down the line jobs, jobs and more jobs. And where are the jobs going to come from? Don't tell me that anyone here or anyone sane believes that jobs can come from making government even more bloated than it is. Jobs are not going to come from the public sector. We have had that experience. The only way the jobs are going to come is through a massive expansion of a legitimate, that means not only legally legitimate, but also with a social conscience, a private sector with a social conscience. And therefore, the creation of an environment in which the private sector can flourish, but ensuring that it has a social conscience, is the challenge of the future. Thank you very much.